The Mexican War was an extremely important event in American history. Yet, it didn't just happen. The events that made up the prelude to the Mexican War were significant in themselves. They would come together in a war that would change the destiny of the West. During the early 1800s, there were three nations controlling North America. Great Britain controlled Canada, the United States controlled the eastern part of the continent, and Mexico the western part. The U.S. during the 1840s was a nation on the move. There was new technology being developed, such as the telegraph and the train. Industries were being started, and immigration was increasing. Americans wanted more room. One way to make more room was to move the Indians west of the Mississippi River. The Indian Removal Act forced many eastern tribes to move during the 1830s and 40s to make room for Americans to grow crops such as cotton. Most Americans of the time believed that their form of government was so good and their culture so dynamic that it was inevitable that the country would expand to the Pacific Ocean. This belief was known as manifest destiny. God seemed to be clearing the way for American expansion. In the picture being shown, note the Indians fleeing from American civilization. Families were traveling the Oregon Trail and populating the Oregon Country and the Mexican territory of California. A man who came to prominence during this dynamic time period was James K. Polk. Polk was a dedicated expansionist who promised in his campaign for president to acquire both California and Oregon. He was the right candidate at the right time and was elected in 1844. He would do his very best to complete manifest destiny. Mexico, on the other hand, was beset with problems. It had an unstable government and society. The upper echelons of the church and the military were corrupt. There were too many officers in the military. Many generals had no men to command. That left them plenty of time to involve themselves in politics. The army protected their interests in the government, not the people. Presidents were constantly being overthrown by the military. If a president tried to reform government relations with the church or the military, he was liable to be overthrown. One general who played on both sides of the political fence in Mexico was General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Sometimes he was a reformer and sometimes a defender of the status quo. He would become president of Mexico 11 times. In 1833 he was elected president but did not want to deal with the unpopular reforms needed with the church and the military. He went home to his hacienda and let Vice President Valentin Gomez Farias do the dirty work. Farias established a measure of religious freedom and some restrictions on the military. As soon as Farias became unpopular with the church and military, Santa Anna came back, ousted Farias, and reversed all of the reforms. Because of this instability, Mexico was virtually bankrupt and could not pay off its loans from foreign nations. In 1838, they fought the Pastry War with France over non-payment of its debts. Santa Anna became a hero in this war, losing a leg when he was hit by French artillery. Mexico's biggest problem in retaining its northern lands was the population. Few Mexicans lived in its northern lands. Only about 7,800 Mexicans lived in Texas by 1835. About 20,000 lived in New Mexico, mainly in Santa Fe. Only about 7,300 Mexicans lived in California, which consisted of what is now California, Utah, Arizona, and Nevada. The northern lands had little connection to the rest of the nation. Travel and trade was difficult because of deserts, the Sierra Madre Mountains, and hostile Indians. Many of the Mexicans in the northern lands felt neglected. Most of New Mexico's trade was with the U.S. along the Santa Fe Trail. Mexico's fatal era may have come in 1822 when they invited 300 American families under the leadership of Stephen Austin to come in and help settle Texas. They had to pledge loyalty to Mexico and become Roman Catholic. Those first 300 families did. East Texas is a good cotton growing environment and other Americans began streaming in. These new arrivals soon outnumbered the Mexicans in Texas. They did not pledge their loyalty. When Mexico outlawed slavery in 1829, they ignored the law. These new immigrants also disagreed with Mexico over religious freedom, along with the lack of roads and schools. Mexico attached Texas to the state of Coahuila to make sure Mexicans outnumbered the Texans. That and Santa Anna's undoing of Frias's reforms led to a revolt in 1835. The most famous battle would be Santa Anna's victory at the Alamo. He had all the survivors executed. Texas forces led by Sam Houston would finally defeat Santa Anna at the Battle of San Jacinto. Santa Anna would be forced to sign a treaty giving Texas its independence. The treaty stated that the southern border was at the Rio Grande. The Mexican Congress exiled Santa Anna and repudiated the treaty. Mexico stated Texas's southern border was at the Nueces River, not the Rio Grande, providing the seed for a larger conflict 10 years later. Texas remained an independent country for 9 years. The majority of Texans wanted to be part of the U.S., but the U.S. didn't annex Texas over concerns about the extension of slavery. By the 1840s, Californios were openly speculating about which country would annex them. California was operating almost as an independent republic anyway. Mariano Vallejo, a military governor, favored American annexation. On the other hand, Pio Pico, another governor, favored the British. James K. Polk had campaigned in 1844 favoring the annexation of Texas. As soon as Polk was elected, President Tyler pushed annexation through. By December of 1845, Texas had agreed to become a state. This angered Mexico, which considered Texas to have been stolen. Once Polk took office, he put into operation his plans to acquire Mexico's northern lands. He preferred a peaceful transaction, but also prepared for a possible war. Polk sent troops under the command of Zachary Taylor to Corpus Christi, near the Nueces River. He also dispatched John Slidell to Mexico to offer $5 million for Texas, $5 million for New Mexico, and $25 million for California. Many Mexican politicians wanted President Paredes to negotiate, believing Mexico could not win a war with the United States. Nevertheless, President Paredes rejected Slidell. Polk then sent General Taylor and his troops to the Rio Grande, well inside the disputed area. He knew what was going to happen, and it did. General Arista was ordered into the area to stop Taylor. General Arista attacked Taylor's troops on April 25, 1846. The Americans declared war on May 11, 1846. The Mexican-American War had commenced. The war would have a great impact on both America's and Mexico's future. Santa Anna would be returned to power. California will have an unusual conquest, and its gold will stay secret just long enough for the Americans to take control. The land won from the war would help lead to the Civil War, and the war would also train a whole new set of young officers, including George McClellan, Robert E. Lee, and a young artillery officer named Ulysses S. Grant. The war will be popular in the South, but unpopular in some parts of the North. A protest by Henry David Thoreau would have reverberations all the way through the civil rights movement. It is these different impacts which will comprise our next lesson.